Hi, and welcome to the first edition of South Texas Now. I'm your host, Vanessa Flores, and today I'm here with my very first guest. He's not only a nurse practitioner and a lawyer, but also my father, Joe Flores.
Thanks, Vanessa, for bringing me on. I feel a little nervous. I've interviewed a lot of people, but being interviewed by your daughter, it's almost surreal. But I'm nervous, and I never get nervous. I'm honored to be here and be your first guest, and I'm proud of you and what you're doing. Not only here on KTMB, but all over the world, people can see you, and that takes a lot of courage.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to talk about is education. And we know that you have a great background in law and nursing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, education for me personally, on a personal level, I was fortunate enough to have a mother and father who went back to school when they were in their late 30s and early 40s. My mother, Flora, and my dad, Alfredo, and my dad became a teacher, and my mom became a nurse. In fact, when I graduated high school, my mom graduated nursing school. I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that I liked healthcare when I was back then, but she said, "Why don't you go into nursing?" I said, "Nursing?" I grew up in a very Hispanic, Latino kind of Mexican American machismo culture. So I was like, no way, And now I'm glad that there's so many more opportunities for you and for so many people. But anyway, I just had this idea that I couldn't do it, but I did, and I loved it. It was like the best of being a man and the best of being a nurturing and caring man. And I liked it because you could help people at their worst. I worked in ER and shock trauma, ICU, people that were the sickest of the sick. But in the back of my head, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I'm a chatterbox, as you know, and I like to write. I like to argue my points. I was the class clown. I was in speech and debate, and we had our own little TV station down in Alice, AISD TV. And so I did that, and I really liked it. And so education for me, everyone that I try to reach, every Hispanic, every Mexican American, every African American, and every poor white, and everybody in between that goes back to school and gets their education, we all better as a society. And I'm sorry to be so long-winded, but I'm speaking from the heart, and I think that it's really very important.
So going back to you growing up in a Mexican-American household and living in a Hispanic community, did you ever find it difficult to seem to make it out and find education and find a place for yourself in the community? Did you ever find that difficult?
I was one of the lucky ones because my parents were such an inspiration. 99% of everybody else wasn't. They were blue collar, nothing wrong with it at all, but I was a sort of a different person, because of the education. My mom didn't have much money, but she saved up and bought us some World Book encyclopedias. When you don't have the internet and you have 3 channels on TV, I read those things from cover to cover. So it was a different sort of thing. On standardized tests, I did very well on things, and I had my brother. My older brother was a voracious reader. He could just read. We'd have reading contests. He was 4 years older than me, but Fred, you really rigged the game. But he was a very, very good reader. He was my inspiration to read. I read books, the classics, from the classics. My very first book that I bought, I was 7. I read one book in one day, cover to cover. The first one, I was 10 and a half, was Tom Sawyer. And so it was different. But when I stepped outside those doors, and my dad used to say, when you step outside those doors, it's a different experience. And it sure was. There was a lot of violence in my community, a lot of drugs, prostitution, everything I saw that a child shouldn't see, I saw. And I had my own paper route and things, and I delivered to the store owners. Back in my day, there were actually small businessmen that could make a living, and there was no major chains that were really imposing. Somebody could open up a store and succeed, and you didn't have to have all these degrees and titles. So it was a different thing. But nevertheless, that experience, it was hard. And there was a lot of racism. I don't have a chip on my shoulder again. I'm fine in my own skin, so to speak. But still, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a street sweeper or a banker and you're Hispanic or you get pulled over, you always have to be ready. It's not only African Americans that face this. Asians are now facing and getting some of it. I can't say that my experience was as severe as African Americans because of slavery and all that. But we were segregated. We had separate, up until about the time that I was born, we had separate water fountains, separate bathrooms. My father ate in the kitchen. My mother, because she was so white and Spanish looking, she could eat in a restaurant. She could work in a store that only whites entered. And it said, there were signs that said, no dogs, no Mexicans, and no the N-words allowed. And that's the way it was. So that is, I came from that background. So in the 70s, people were just starting to go to college, like my father. People were just starting to go to law school. There were very few Hispanics, Mexican Americans that went back to law school. So again, I'm sorry, my answers are kind of long because it is so much to talk about. The experience, it is overwhelming sometimes if I stop and think about it, where I've come from and where I've been. But I'm only 40 miles away from where I grew up. But it's a lifetime away.
Right. So that brings up a question that I have, how we were talking about the injustices that the minorities face, whether you're African American, you're Hispanic, you're Asian American. So with your knowledge of the law and your experience in the court system, do you see that there is a prejudice for a system that's supposed to be equal? Do you see a prejudice in the incarceration rates, for example?
Yes, we have mass incarceration rates. Poor whites are also a victim of it. And so I've seen in recent years, poor whites vote against their own interests just because of their skin. I personally think that they're manipulated into saying, well, I'm middle class. No, all of us can't be middle class. That's for sure. There's the 1% rich that control everything. As a lawyer, I see that. And then the 99% of the rest of us. And poor whites, Hispanics, Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, doesn't matter, and Latin Americans in general, and African Americans, mass incarceration. We've seen it double and triple since the 90s. Ever since the Clinton years, and yes, I said Clinton, Democrat, is the one who wrote the crime bill. And so the difference between rock cocaine and powder, if a rich, affluent person had powder cocaine, and then they had crack for so cheap that there was a poor man's cocaine. So if you're going to use drugs, you bought the rock. The rock was like exponentially more time, and smaller amounts got you more time. And then you had to do mandatory minimums. It took the discretion out of sentencing from the judge, and it was the Senate and the congressman and the president that decided. The executive branch told the judicial branch how to think because they took away a lot of the discretion. And for some reason that helped. The mandatory minimums kind of equalized, but it also hurt. In other words, what I'm saying is, if you had a white person come in, they got 2 years, and then a Hispanic or African American came in and they got 20 years, that was the judge's discretion. Now, with mandatory minimums and sentencing guidelines, the judge is limited, and they can go up or way down, but they have to explain why, and both sides can appeal. But what I'm saying is, now we've had privatization of prisons where they're selling for stock on Wall Street. They don't know that. We have slavery in, if you read the new Jim Crow laws by an excellent peer, law professor here in America, I strongly recommend people read that book, the new Jim Crow laws, because basically you have sentencing where people are doing slave labor. You have prisoners doing mass work for pennies, literally pennies per hour. They're making things. They had call centers. And there's cheap labor, and corporations have them employed. Corporations make the prisons now. There is no real rehabilitation. I don't want to sound jaded, but we incarcerate more people on the planet than anyone else. We're 5% of the world's population, but we incarcerate 25% of the world's prisoners. We put more people in jail than Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. We are the people that lock up people the most. And ironically, and I love my country, I'm patriotic, but we call ourselves the home of the land of the free, home of the brave. Land of the free, not so much. I mean, people can get arrested and thrown in, and we've seen the mass riots about Black Lives Matter. I think that that has been a flashpoint that educates us that we really need to learn and look at our prison system and why we're locking people up. Because we've seen this, and it's there. Even the Attorney General, the top cop, Eric Holder, under the Obama administration, said we incarcerate far too many people for far too long in this country, and for no reason at all.
I agree with that, and I feel like many people.
We're running on 15 minutes now, just to give you a heads up.
Okay. I'm sorry, it's just that I get very
Okay,
passionate
so
about
what do
this.
I- so
No,
I'm
no,
gonna be
no,
like-
no, wait, let me finish and just say, so I'm sorry, it's just a very emotional, and I'm not a big emotional guy or anything, but as a lawyer, it's just, I find it offensive and manifestly unjust that this is happening.
Exactly, because many people tend to overlook the prison system because they believe, well, it's not my problem, so I just won't worry about that. But there is racism in there as well, as you said, and people are just looking at them as just profit. So are there any concluding words that you would like to say for not only the Hispanic community, but all the minorities and everyone here in the Coastal Bend? An important message about education and trying to remain strong in such a changing time with racism and prejudices. What is there something that you could tell our viewers?
Well, I'd like to say to everybody out there that I believe that not everybody is perhaps meant to be a Rhodes Scholar. I certainly wasn't, but I got through law school. I got my master's degree. It's not unachievable. Anybody can do it, but you need that support and help. And there are organizations out there to help. Our nonprofit, Education is Our Freedom, picked the worst of the worst kids that were in trouble. They were destined to go to prison, and we have an 85% plus success rate. Commissioner Joey Gonzalez, Judge Joe Benavides, and I, Joe Flores, the three Joes, we were very proud to make Education of Freedom, and we've already given away thousands of scholarships and opportunities to people in combination with universities and with Del Mar College, for instance, and Texas A&M, Corpus Christi, and Texas A&M Kingsville. We've produced pharmacists, we've produced people with business degrees, and those that were destined to meet those gallows, the prison system. I'm proud that once you take one person out of the prison system, it affects a whole community of people. Their whole family is affected by incarceration. If you take out that father from the equation, you take out that mother and put her in prison, what happens to the children? A cascade of problems. You're going to have the CPS involved, Child Protective Services. They have a job to do. These children end up in foster care if they can't find someone. And of course, with mass incarceration, there's far more people that have a record that ordinarily might get a break. And now we've done some things like we can erase certain records. We can do pretrial diversion, which is giving somebody a second chance and taking away and erasing those records. Now, a lot of this doesn't apply to violent criminals. And even as a defense attorney, I agree with that. I think violent criminals that rape or that kill or that do mass shootings, I think that a lot of our budgetary constraints have taken away the mental health aspect of things and public health. But I would say that there has to be a penalty when you hurt somebody else like this. I think that the guiltless, I look at it like that, drug addiction, alcoholism that affects families' lives and destroys people, we need to put more into that. And I'm not a passionate liberal, certainly, more of a moderate. But I just want to say in closing that education will prevent mass incarceration. And I want to thank you for bringing me on as your first guest. I'm honored and I'm privileged.
So I want to thank you again for being my first guest here on South Texas Now, and I want to thank my viewers for tuning in to the first ever episode, and I hope to see you back here again. Thank you.